Apologize if I'm a little late. I'm in another committee hearing, important business, FAA reauthorization. We all want to have safe flights. I got involved with this real early on. I was in Congress for 3 days. I think, Marjorie, you too. We were in Congress for 3 days when this all took place. It's probably the last member, if not the last member on the House floor that day. I'm an old law enforcement officer for 30 years, as a sheriff of a large county for 8 years. So I stood at the back doors, the main back doors leading into the chambers. Had a conversation with an individual on the outside, and anyway, it was a few weeks after that I was approached by then Majority Leader Kevin McCarthy, asking me to read the Senate version, the Senate reports, because the Senate had some hearings early on. I think it was in March and April. So Kevin McCarthy approached me and asked me to read all those reports and write a report on what my feelings and my thoughts were because of my extensive law enforcement experience. And I did so. I provided him a 14-page document. And when I looked at the report and the OIG recommendations and everything that I saw, what was wrong that day, January 6th, folks, was a law enforcement failure, an epic law enforcement failure. When Kevin, Leader McCarthy, now Speaker McCarthy, asked me to be one of the 5 on the January 6th Select Committee. I was honored to be asked to, and then obviously Nancy Pelosi did what nobody else has done as Speaker, rejected Minority Leader's picks to be on a Select Committee. So we weren't on the committee, and she picked a couple of rhinos and that whole committee is all about Donald Trump. Anyway, so when you look at January 6th and you read these special event assessments, because I spent a lot of time on this, and when you look at the December 15th, the December 30th, and the January 3rd special events assessment, we knew that things were going to get ugly up here. It was quite clear. We knew that the Capitol itself, they meaning the leadership of the Capitol Police, i.e. an Assistant Chief Pittman, who's no longer here, they had all the intelligence. They had all the intelligence that it was going to get ugly up here. Extremist groups from both sides, white supremacist groups, high propensity for violence. They knew thousands of people were coming. And it was glaring in that January 3rd report. It was on page 12 out of the 14. And it said things are getting stupid. And I believe, me personally, I believe that they hid the intelligence. It's like they wanted this to happen. I say that because you remember Harry Dunn, one of the first officers, he testified, he was one of the 4. Harry Dunn's testimony says, he goes, I didn't think it was going to be any different than any other day. Kind of like the big marches they had November and December, relatively nonviolent. He didn't think this was going to be like any other day. And so when you look at the hours and hours of video, you see most of the Capitol Police officers don't have any type of shields or stuff. It was the Metropolitan Police that came prepared. But the U.S. Capitol Police, I spent some time and I focused a lot of my time on the shooting of and the killing of Ashley Babbitt. I document this very well. I was probably one of the first. I think, Paul, you said it as well. I believe Ashley Babbitt was murdered that day. Now, you say, well, how could you say that? I said, well, I'm a sheriff. I've had deputies shoot and kill people. I've had my own deputies shot and killed. The point is, I know a little bit about use of force. And what disturbed me about that investigation into Lieutenant Byrd is it never went to a grand jury. You want to have the vote of confidence of the American people. Send every law enforcement shooting, justified, questionable, whatever. Send it to a grand jury. It never went to a grand jury. Most of the people in the Capitol Police will even tell you. They'll tell you that, hey, this was a quick investigation. Lieutenant Byrd, and I hope when we have a new president in 2 years that he goes to a grand jury. That shooting should go to a grand jury. And that's my commitment to you, Ashley, to Ms. Babbitt. If I can do anything, that should go to a grand jury at a minimum. My point is I'm just going to leave you at this. When you look at those special event assessments in that January 3rd, I had an opportunity to talk to then the National Guard commander, and I said to him, I said, General, I said, if you read that report, the National Guard should have been on our nation's capital on January 4th. He agreed with me. If you would have read the report, it justified, the intelligence was there, and General Walker said to me, the National Guard would have been on our nation's capital on January 4th like the intelligence suggested. January 6th would have never happened. So then what happens? We win the House, and where does Miss Pittman go? She's got a nice cushy job now, UC Berkeley, making $200,000 a year. Nancy found her a job. Nancy found her a job. Apparently, Matt, I guess she was up here last week for House admin. I don't know, but I wish I had 5 minutes with her, because I'm telling you, if there's one person that to me could have prevented this from taking place, it's Miss Pittman, and she should be held accountable, because it was one of the darkest days in our nation's history. One of the darkest days, and they just sat on the intelligence. Shameful. We can never allow it to happen again. And I'm going to end with this, but Marjorie was talking about everybody, Donald Trump speaking in the ellipse. The first breach that took place at about 1:10 p.m., Donald Trump was still speaking. It was a 22-block walk. It takes you a half hour to walk from, so no. And you see Ray, Mr. Ray, right? Whispering in the guy's ear, boom. And they put bicycle racks. Think about that. Tens of thousands of people coming up. What are we going to have for a perimeter? A damn bicycle rack that couldn't keep your cat in your yard, right? I mean, none of this just made sense. So these are some of the things we wanted to do on that select committee, because I thought I could have exposed them for who they truly are. This is all about Donald Trump coming back in 2024. Shame on them. But the greatest leader in my lifetime, folks, keep the faith. He's coming back.
Thank you. I'm going to recognize myself for questions. Mr. Straka, you were describing some of the blacklisting that you encountered in your life following these events. Can you elaborate on that?
Sure. Do you want me to go back to the statement? Or just
yeah, sure.
Okay. Well, where I'd left off, I had said that I'd been permanently banned by PayPal, Venmo, Stripe, Patreon, my donor. And I was in D.C. on January 6th as a private citizen, not on behalf of any of my organizations. Nonetheless, my organization, the Walkaway Foundation, and the Walkaway Campaign PAC, both were permanently banned by PayPal and Stripe and a number of payment processors, as well as donor portals. We were first banned by MailChimp as an email service, because it was said that we were using the email service to send and receive emails about planning violence or fundraising for political violence. Constant Contact then banned us, and after that we were banned by 4 more email services, including SendLane and MailerLite.
Let me stop you there.
Sure.
We have developed evidence indicating that Bank of America turned over all of their records regarding anyone who bought a cup of coffee in Washington, D.C. on January 6th. I want to know what your perspective is on that, on the fact that such a large private company would, of their own volition, turn over so much stuff and seemingly violate people's privacy.
Well, I think it's horrifying, and obviously I think that there's an attempt here to try to understand who's funding whom. Certainly there was an interest in who gives to my organization, things like that. I'm personal friends since January 6th with a fellow J6 defendant named Derek Evans, who's running for Congress in West Virginia. A major bank told him that they were canceling his bank mortgage and that he had 30 days to find a new bank to finance his bank mortgage. I mean, while going through the most high-profile criminal case in American history.
Does January 6th open the door to the need for the Congress to look at legal reforms so that we don't see people of any political stripe barred from the financial world by virtue of their nonviolent politics?
I mean, somehow we, the defendants of January 6th, need to be able to have some sort of a voice. I mean, even I am probably one of the most high-profile people who was arrested in conjunction with January 6th. Nonetheless, I felt like it was a David versus Goliath situation. I mean, I could not keep up with the amount of banning and cancellation and I mean payment processors, email services, donor portals. The government put me on a terrorism watch list along with every other J6er. We all have a designation of what's called Quad S. So when we go to the airport now, we have to go through hours of special screening. It's literally TSA told me this is the highest level terrorism list you can be on and still be allowed to fly. They follow you around the airport with teams of agents. Sometimes they have dogs. They station themselves all around you at the gate. They bring special equipment and swab every item in your bag for explosive materials, your hands, your feet, stick their hand down your pants doing pat downs. They do all of this in front of the other passengers multiple times when you're flying. people with misdemeanor charges, misdemeanor disorderly conduct charges.
Well, this is very helpful because during the appropriations process, we can put riders to prohibit the use of funds on some of the things that would seemingly violate people's due process. Mr. Strand, I wanted your advice on a legislative concept I've been talking about with some of my colleagues, and it's on the matter of venue, because we've seen a number of defendants drug into the jurisdiction of Washington, D.C., and then they face a different jury dynamic than they would otherwise face elsewhere in the country. What would be your advice to the Congress about looking at some venue reform to give defendants the ability to face these charges where they're from?
Well, thank you, Congressman, and I couldn't stress the importance of that more. I'm going to take it back from the future and say, right now, I'm about to go to prison for almost 3 years. I did nothing wrong. And the only reason that happened, not the only reason, but the main reason it happened so easily, is because I was denied the constitutional guarantee of a fair trial by a jury of my peers. Not only that, but my sentence was worsened by a judge who explicitly said from the bench, on the record, read the transcript, that he was furious at me for criticizing the government publicly. Specifically, he was furious at me for making the claim, which is my First Amendment protected right to do, but the evidence bears it out, that Washington, D.C. juries are entirely biased, flagrantly so. If I could tell the short story of my experience during my 8-day trial, the most interesting part was day one, which was jury selection. And this was not a random assortment of citizens fulfilling their civic duty to participate in a jury trial. These were people that were hanging on every moment, hoping to get chosen so that they could experience the personal gratification of crucifying someone that they politically despise. They openly admit this.
Very important, that venue issue. Mr. Clark, I have a question for you specifically. Do you believe you were framed by the January 6th Select Committee?
Oh, absolutely, Congressman, I do. I think that, I was the only person at the Justice Department, at a significant level, Senate confirmed spot, who was interested in investigating the election.
Well, I know that to be the case, Mr. Clark, and the reason I know that to be the case, and I'm glad I get to say it here in a public forum, is because I became aware of evidence that U.S. attorneys were developing showcasing fraud in the election. And perhaps that evidence would lead nowhere, perhaps it would lead to the crime of the century, but it should not have been squelched. And Bill Barr was suppressing evidence and stopping it from being developed that showcased irregularities, and not just irregularities, fraud, where people were fraudulently requesting those ballots. And I told my friend Scott Perry that on the floor, that I was aware of that evidence. And now I believe we see you and we see our colleague Scott Perry unfairly targeted, and I want you and the world to know that if you had a willingness to stop the U.S. Department of Justice from rat-holing cases and squirreling away information that would have been helpful to learn on that day, you were